Only in the case of the Gazans are we repeatedly told that anybody who accepts the Gazans is complicit in ethnic cleansing.
The greatest travesty is Egypt's closing of its border, building a new wall.
I am still firmly of the view that the only way to bring quiet to this area is not by way of all of this nonsensical board of peace claptrap. It is by the relocation of the Gazan people en masse. Those are the negotiations that I would like to see take place. I wonder if we could conceive, for example, of a scenario wherein Israel and the Americans are sitting down and negotiating about an enclave inside the Sinai Peninsula during a discussion where the Egyptians are not brought to the table in the way that we are expected to be absent from negotiations when people discuss what the future of Israel ought to be. I wonder if we could reverse that or invert it and instead have a discussion about where the Gazans should be inside Egypt in the absence of Egyptian participation. It troubles me that no such thing is ever considered simply because Sisi, who's massively culpable for what happened on October 7th, incidentally, says that he will not accept the Gazan people. Finally, on this point, I just want to hammer home a couple of considerations before we get your response. I know that you don't agree with me on it. I know that you don't think that it's viable, and I understand why you don't think it's viable, but I think it's essential. If we look to other theatres, we see, for example, that during the Syrian civil war, which was Syrian civilians falling prey to domestic internal tyranny, the international community accepted the Syrian refugees and was applauded for doing so, neighbouring states such as Turkey and non-neighbouring states such as Germany. In the example of Ukraine, which was external tyranny, external invasion by the Russians into Ukraine, we saw the international community accept Ukrainian refugees, neighbouring and non-neighbouring, neighbouring such as Poland, non-neighbouring including the State of Israel, and everybody applauded. Only in the case of the Gazans are we repeatedly told that anybody who accepts the Gazans is complicit in ethnic cleansing, in total contravention to international conventions elsewhere, as I've just delineated, and B, that the Gazans, despite the enormous suffering that's a result of their own leadership, as you said at the top of this program, that the Gazans uniquely, unlike the Syrians, unlike the Ukrainians, they don't want to go anywhere. They want to stay firmly in the rubble in which they find themselves and the discomfort in which they find themselves. And I would just say that in either of those scenarios, whether external pressure, such as Israel's defensive war and crossing into the Gaza Strip, or by the internal pressure, the internal tyranny, the domestic tyranny that we're always told the Gazans are suffering from, namely that they're under the jackboot of Hamas. In either case, there is clear international precedent. Those people are allowed to leave where they are. And I think that is the only resolution that can bring security to the state of Israel.
What would be controversial in even international law, there is a difference from in conflict, temporary displacement. All the examples you gave, especially Ukraine, the civilians that were welcomed by other nations and evacuated, many of those returned to their state. So there is that aspect, but just from a political feasibility aspect, I do believe the greatest travesty that is under responsibility hasn't been even sought, or accountability, or the lessons learned, is Egypt's closing of its border, building a new wall. You and I have discussed that. I believe it is a horrific, historic horrificness. The one nation that could have built a displaced persons camp under the United Nations. I interviewed Ambassador Dermer. He's like, sign a UN Security Council resolution that they get to come back. Thousands of civilian lives that Hamas wanted to die are on the hands of the Egyptians, in my opinion. Absolutely. And that is the difference. But once the conflict ends, then we're getting in a different territory about allowing people to leave. I actually want to end the refugee insanity that is prevalent only with the Palestinian populations, Gaza, Judea, Samaria, you name it. And that's why in this, whatever the plan is, UNRWA, in my opinion, needs to be disbanded as an organization, as the single perpetrator of the continuing of a special refugee status, where I agree in temporary displacements for the pursuit of preserving civilian life and the returning of them. Because if they were to move, in my opinion, Benjamin, into Egypt, not in a displaced persons camp, which is temporary, then they would again be viewed as refugees. And the cycle to me continues, but I understand we are different positions.